First of all, I want to introduce you to my friend Michael here.
Yeah.
We're kind of new friends. We kind of met via another friend, our friend George. Shout out to George in the UK. We've kind of known each other by proxy for a few years.
Yeah.
We kind of go back a few years.
Yeah.
Maybe 10 years. Yeah,
2015.
crazy.
Wonderful.
But yes, our paths have finally crossed. Michael has written this fantastic book on strength training. Obviously, I like strength training. It's kind of my thing. And Michael just happened to write an amazing book on it. It generally is a fantastic read. And I know some of you guys may have read it already. If you haven't, we do have some on sale today. And I think it is the first book that has really done a really comprehensive deep dive into the history of strength training through the ages, and now bringing it all the way up to modern day. And we're not just, of course, talking about how to get strong. We're talking about how to live longer and how to improve the quality of our lives. And Michael has done painstaking research into that and how it all translates into modern day, basically into our modern lives. So, Michael, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me here.
As promised, we just got huge, and now we're going to get smart. And I guess my first kind of question to you is why? Why write this book? Why was it important for you to write this book?
Just after I turned 40, I decided I wanted to learn a new sport. I wanted to learn a sport that scared me. I wanted to learn whitewater kayaking.
Oh, wow.
But I knew that I had to be a lot stronger if I was going to handle myself on the river. So I started training at a gym more seriously than I ever had before. And it just changed me head to toe. And I began to see that my workouts were also one of the most useful things I was doing for other people in my life in kind of a weird way. You know, I knew a lot of people who worked out sort of on and off, you know, trained for a race now and then, were outdoorsy kind of in a urban, suburban kind of way. But I didn't know people who trained the way they brushed their teeth. And when I started to do that, it made other people curious about it. And I just got really interested in both the science of what was happening to my own body and also the cultural phenomenon of strength training. Like, who is it that gets to take part in this and why? Like, why are the gym walls situated where they are? And so I decided to really look hard at where our ideas and our experience of strength and muscle came from, how they changed over the years. And 8 years of full-time work later, there it is.
Yeah. So if you read the book, when he says 8 years of research, it's 8 years of research. Like, it's very, very deep. There's a lot that's got into this book. And it's interesting what you just said, because we've just done the accelerator. Is anybody here on the accelerator? No, it's oh, you are. Yeah. So it's one of the things we've been talking about is habits, right? Developing good habits. When you talked about brushing your teeth, this is something we've been saying, like, you have to make going to the gym like brushing your teeth. It just has to become a daily habit. That's just something part of your life. It's not something that has to be this big, like, wrestling decision, like, oh my God, should I go to the gym or not? It's like, you just get up and do it. And once you get into that habit, once it just becomes part of your day, the kind of challenge of it kind of like goes away, because the gym almost becomes like the easy part. Like, you just get up and go to the gym. The harder part is the nutrition and the lifestyle stuff that all goes alongside it. But if you make the gym the habit, that's often the catalyst to all this other stuff. And when we talk about stacking healthy habits, it often starts with the gym, because the gym then gives you a reason. It's like, you don't want to go out the night before because you're training early the next morning. You don't want to be bad because you don't want to feel shit in the gym. And you want to see you're putting in all this work. You want to see some result at the end of it. So all these other things start to come into place. And that's what I've seen, like, broadly over the year. And hopefully I've created somewhere where people get addicted to fitness. I'm here to create addiction. And hopefully it's a healthy addiction. And, you know, the great thing about this place and all of our gyms is that we have a really good, people come to the gym very frequently. So some gyms run the business model of they want people to join and not show up. Like, we have a really good show rate at this gym, because people generally come and they want to keep coming, like, day in, day out, because they understand that they're part of a program. And we'll talk about this, but, like, strength training is not just something you jump into here and there. If you want to make progress, you have to do it consistently. And so it becomes, when you're part of the gym, you're part of a program and you're on that program and you want to keep seeing results. So you keep coming back for more and more and more and more. Then it becomes the habit. Then it becomes something you don't want to fall off from. And then you have a reason to, like, keep doing it. And for all the other things to have to kind of align with it.
if I could just jump
Yep,
in,
jump in.
add
I'll
one,
talk forever, so you
no,
got to
no,
jump in.
one more thing that I've noticed about this place. I mean, I've only been here this morning, but in the way you walked me through it, in the way you told me about its evolution, you're not just trying to create an addiction, like instill sensations. You're actually giving people the resources to create a story about strength in their own lives
Yeah,
that draws on these various traditions and these various practices, strength training, martial arts, uh, 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 bodybuilding, and the physical therapy element of it. And this is another thing that is, I think, well, I haven't been able to find it in other books about strength. It was really important to me from the beginning to look for what is the story about strength that we create in our lives? What are the elements of those stories? What have the elements been over time? Because I think that there are some very basic things, kind of like the elements of myth that we all draw on. To be here in Pharos, speaking of myth, to be here at this. I mean, I don't know does everybody know what Pharos was? Pharos was one of the eight wonders of the ancient world. It was the lighthouse in Alexandria. And as Peter was talking about this place earlier this morning, I thought this is like that. It's a solid center that has a sweeping light that is illuminating the various practices that you can draw on to create your own story of strength.
yeah. I've always been fascinated with stories and people's journeys and people's stories. And like, obviously, everyone comes into the gym from a different place, right? Some people grew up doing sport, some people didn't. Some people's sport comes naturally. It's like, oh, I was a track athlete, or I played soccer. And some people never did anything like that in sport, and they find the gym later in their lives. So it's a very different story in their fitness journey. But if you can present a space in which people can feel comfortable in that arena and not feel like they have to have been the track athlete, not feel like they have to wrestle in high school, that they can just come in, get the benefits of strength that everybody gets and understand those benefits. And obviously also do that. And we talked about this earlier, do that amongst other people in that community with that kind of like spirit that rises everybody. This is a different experience to just kind of like coming in, putting your headphones on and just doing your own thing. Hopefully you will get that out of it. It's a lot more energizing, a lot more uplifting to feel that physicality around you and let it kind of drive you and push you. And sometimes that's the reason why you keep coming back. Sometimes we fall in love with fitness. Sometimes we fall in love with people, right? And just like being around people, being amongst people. We saw it in the pandemic when it was like, a lot of people, like, this was the only thing they had to like commune with people. It became like an epicenter for communal interaction. So it's like, I don't have anything else going on. I'm going to go to the car park at Pharos, let it come work out, because at least I get to see people. So we understand that, the strength training element is a huge part of what we do, but we also understand that just being amongst people and creating a society is also what we do, and making the society accessible to everybody.
That is so on point with the whole source of this book. There weren't many models for the kind of book that I wanted to write when I started out. And some of the few were the books about food by Michael Pollan, especially The Omnivore's Dilemma. And one day I was reading one of those books and I came across this sentence that was a real light bulb moment for me. He said, "What if we started to think about food less as a thing and more as a relationship?" And that was his way of trying to say, shake the hand that feeds you. Get to know, go to the farmer's market, get to know the people who make your food, understand the supply chains of value and the social structures within which we are feeding ourselves. And as soon as I read that, what if we started to think about food less as a thing and more as a relationship? I thought, what if we started to think about strength less as a form of self-assertion and more as a form of connection? And as it turns out, on every single level, as it turns out, on every single level, that's really an accurate description of strength. Like from the cellular level, all of our movements that we make, every curl that you just did in the arms race was the result ultimately of something called a motor unit. Our muscles are composed of many motor units. A motor unit is what is created when neurological stimulus reaches out to a group of muscle cells. And these repeated waves of stimulus teach those cells to do a new thing. So when you're learning a new lift and it's awkward, it's just because you haven't developed the motor units yet that can understand and lock in those movement patterns. But once you make those connections, once essentially that classroom of muscle cells connects with the neurological stimulus, that connection gives you the power of strength. But even going back to like ancient Greek language of strength, connection is the most basic concept of the phenomenon. In Homer's Iliad, he had 8 words for different kinds of strength. And only 2 of those words described solely human, individual exercises of strength. 6 of those words were about the strength that was created in collaboration between humans and the gods. So to an ancient Greek, they thought of receiving strength more than having strength. Strength defined them to the point where they would describe a person not as, you wouldn't say Peter walked across the room. You would say the strength that is Peter walked across the room.
That's what everyone here says about me.
And yet the strength that is Peter was never Peter's alone. It was the collaboration between what you chose to do and the gifts that the gods gave you, in part as rewards for your preparations, but in part for their own purposes.
Yeah. In terms of like muscle, and this is something, that has become part of modern literature a lot more, but why is muscle so important to us, and what does it do for us as we age?
Most of us grew up with a really limited and limiting understanding of muscle. We thought of it as mainly an aspect of how we look. But muscle turns out to be at the core of who we are. I mean, physiologically, muscle is related to every other system in the body in ways that only in recent decades are we starting to fully, get within spitting distance of fully understanding. Muscle builds bone density, it builds cardiovascular health, it builds mental health. And as we get older, muscle increasingly becomes nothing less than a matter of life and death. I mean, all of the major diseases, chronic diseases of aging now have really good, high quality, randomized controlled trial scientific evidence showing that muscular strength and mass help to prevent or treat them in many cases better than any medication we have. And in some cases, like for frailty or for dementia, we have no medicine that can treat those things, but resistance training, weight training does.
Yeah, and there's a great section of the book where it talks about people in their 90s training in a nursing home, and it's in New York, right?
It's in Boston.
It's in Boston. And they do a strength training study there, and basically all of their lives improve, but all of their comorbidities reduce, and their life expectancy just goes up. And they didn't even start strength training until their 90s. Like, this is like from start to, for how long was the study for? Like
that was that first one I think was 8 weeks.
8 weeks. So 8 weeks of training in your 90s to improve your life expectancy at that point. Just shows you how powerful like strength training can be like throughout our lives. So I think a lot of us historically have thought of like, this is something you do when you're young, like to be young and hot. But it turns out like this is something we need to keep doing forever to improve our lives and to improve both the quality and the length of our lives. And I think that's one of the big takeaways from the book. It's like, oh, this is forever. Like, this isn't just something I'm doing now. This is a forever thing.
And I really want to underscore what you're saying, how new this research is, how we really are the first generations in history to have the opportunity to act on this knowledge. When the first study of high intensity strength training for nonagenarians, for 90-year-olds, was done in 1989, it was still believed by most doctors that it was impossible to build strength or mass past the age of 50 or 60. Nobody had ever even tried to work with older people to see what would happen if they really worked at the higher end of their
Mm.
ability. But what they found was that in this 8-week program, their response, both in terms of building strength and building mass, was the same in relative terms as somebody in their 20s or 30s. So the minimum strength gain in that group of the oldest, frailest people was like 60%. The average strength gain was 174%. And the maximum strength gain was close to 400%. But they didn't just get stronger. Getting stronger gave them the wherewithal for what we call functional, movement. Like, we all have this idea that training has to be very directed in a kind of fancy and detailed way. But it turns out not to be true. If you just give older people the strength, it gives them the ability to get up and go and do what they want to do on their own steam, measured by ankle bracelet activity monitors, like measured in objective terms. These people's spontaneous activity in the nursing home increased by 35% just from getting stronger.
Yeah, it's wild. And obviously, and a big portion of the book is also to do with female strength training, women in strength training, which is another thing that historically was not that well studied, or there's a lot of misconceptions around it. So, what did you learn about female strength training and women in strength over the years? I mean, Jan Todd was a huge part of it, right? She was like kind of your central character for the female thing. So, what was the real story there?
Yeah. The whole book is built around the stories of three really interesting individuals. The story of women's strength training, and really even in a larger sense of how strength training shapes identity for all of us, is based around the story of Jan Todd. Now, Jan Todd, more than anybody, is responsible for the popularization of heavyweight training among women within our lifetimes. In 1975, she went from never having picked up a weight to 18 months later breaking a world record in the women's deadlift that had stood for 50 years. And that kicked off about 10 years in which the Guinness Book of World Records called her the strongest woman in the world. She became one of the world's leading powerlifting coaches. She co-authored the first scientific strength training guidelines for women, which weren't published until 1989. Again, like, underscoring how new all of this information is, how, like, really all of us still are on the on the on the bleeding edge of exploring what this can be in our lives. But Jan Todd started her whole odyssey of strength training just because she got lucky enough to go into a gym and see another woman lifting heavy weights. She didn't understand that women could do that. And the fact that she had an example enabled her to discover her own potential. One of the things that I think is so amazing about Pharos and about the class we just went through is that every single person here is an example for all the others. I mean, it was so inspiring just to see people trying, trying to push through. And Jan Todd said that when she was growing up, in her words, girls didn't try hard. Girls just culturally weren't expected to do this. And now we have a whole gym full of women who, many of whom today will break the woman's world record in deadlifting from 1975.
Right. Yeah. What do you think? What and why do you think misconceptions around women in strength training persist?
Hmm.
I got some ideas, but you can.
I mean, one very simple thing is just numbers, demographics. In all the gyms in the United States today, 70% of the human beings will be men. It is like, we see women on social media lifting weights. We see videos of the grandmas who lift weights, and we feel like the world has changed, but it really hasn't. There aren't many people who are doing this, and the few people who do it are people who think of themselves as very healthy and by and large are highly educated. So we're just not doing a good job of sharing this
Mm.
with people who don't fit those two descriptions.
Yeah. And I think sometimes because we see it and I see it on a daily basis, because I'm around a lot of women in strengthening all the time, it's easy to assume that that is the norm.
Yeah.
But you realize outside of like the bubbles that we're in, like it really isn't the norm. And we have to keep like spreading that message. Because if I were to speak to my mother, she'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm not doing that.
Right, right.
Because it's just like a generational thing, but also there's just been, years and years of literature around women that has been not discouraging, but almost saying, whether it was like the big and bulky message or like,
Right.
women look like this is the kind of things that they do. They don't do these kinds of things. And it's always been that like poor messaging over and over again. So it's almost like we now have to like almost oversell it to try and balance that out to say
Right.
like, no, these are the women in strength training. This is what happens. This is the future. And that's something that I think we've tried to do over the years. And we obviously we'll keep pushing that narrative, but it takes almost like a constant repetition of that narrative from multiple sources. And it can't just be like my voice, obviously, because people will look at me and say, well, what are you talking about? It has to come from women. It has to come from
Yes.
has to come from Jan Todd.
Right.
And, those voices to keep pushing a different narrative to change the story.
Yeah, yeah. And I think as a result of some of the things you just said, a lot of women look at strength training and they think that they have to have a way into it that is very particular, that is very different from men's strength training,
Mm,
even though the research really shows that most of us can get the maximum benefits from doing basically the same thing. And, if none of us ever got to do anything but 3 sets of 10, doing weights that feel pretty heavy to lift 3 or 4 times a week, we'd probably be fine for the rest of our lives. I mean,
yeah,
we can make it a lot more interesting, and there are definitely benefits, but we have to recognize that those are basically marginal benefits.
yeah,
For most human beings, um, most of what we need we can get in a really basic strength program, and it's something we can always make time for,
yeah.
just the same way we can always make time for brushing our teeth.
One of the obstacles I've come up to over the years is like female clients that I've trained. Some these feel like boys' exercises and not girls'
Huh.
exercises, and then it's that conversation of like, there's no such thing as boys' exercises and girls' exercises. There's strength training and there's not strength training. Like it's,
Right.
so it's reframing things. It's changing the language. It's realizing that like a lot of marketing is marketing. They're trying to make money in something else. So they're pushing that out to sell that thing.
Right.
Because if you say to everybody, like you just said, you just need to do 3 sets of 10 of this and this for the rest of your life. It's true, but it doesn't make money.
Right. Exactly.
So there has to be like all this other stuff to kind of keep money circulating in the industry, which sadly like detracts people from the real path that they should be on. Um, on that line around misconceptions, did you come across any other misconceptions in strength training in general when it comes to like strength and hypertrophy and age and all those things that were like very telling through history that we just keep repeating, like stories that we keep repeating that are wrong?
Really, the main one is the myth of brain versus brawn. Um,
Right.
the idea that somehow there's a zero sum game between what we do to build up our bodies and what we can do to build up our brains. Now, this actually started for this whole idea started for a very specific reason. And it has commercial roots. It was the ancient Roman equivalent of social media branding. So in ancient Rome, the elite schools were called gymnasium schools. They were built on ancient Greek ideals of education. And there was a competition to see who could be in charge of taking care of the health of these students. And the competition was between doctors and athletic trainers. And doctors, especially one doctor whose name was Galen, made a big argument over and over in the strongest possible terms, saying that doctors and medicine needed to be in charge of everybody's health because if you put trainers in charge, they're just going to make athletes who build mass. And if they build mass, it will smother their souls and make it impossible for them to think. This goes back to ancient Greece. It was part of Plato's myth of the creation of human beings that the important parts of our bodies had no padding on them, and the less important parts were covered with padding. And the padding, the mass, the muscle, had only two functions. One was insulation to keep us warm, and the other was padding in case we fall down. So all of our ideas that bigger, stronger people are basically dumber just come from doctors' rhetorical dirty tricks so they can make more money and get the jobs instead of the trainers. And yet we're still stuck on that.
Yeah.
We still believe that, even though more and more research shows building muscle and strength is one of the best things we can do for our mental health. The story of Maria Fiataroni Singh, the doctor who ran the first studies of high intensity strength training for nonagenarians, the next chapter of her story is, what could I do with weight training to treat depression? And so she and another doctor who became her husband over the course of doing this experiment, they they gave this basic 3 sets of 10 full body program, 3-4 times a week, 3 months. And they found that for 75% of people, high intensity weight training treated depression as well as the best antidepressant drugs. Now, it didn't work for everybody. For 25% of people, it had no effect at all. But for the majority of people, heavy weight training, but not lightweight training, treats depression with the same effect as the pills that many of us are taking right now. Um, it also doesn't have to be either or. There are some psychiatrists now who are using heavy weight training as adjunct treatment so that people don't have to take quite as much of the psychiatric medications, which, as we get older, can have a lot of side effects that create other problems for us. They're bad for balance. They increase the risk of falls. Um, but my favorite detail of all about the relationship between muscle and mind is that weight training, but not aerobic training, actually increases the size of the posterior cingulate cortex in our brains. And that's the site of emotional memory and empathy. It's the part of the brain that atrophies first in Alzheimer's disease, even before people show any other symptoms of the disease. So this whole idea that lifting weights makes you selfish and stupid is exactly the opposite
Yeah.
of the truth. It makes you more connected, more able to imagine other people's experiences, and it makes it possible for you to hold on to those qualities of life, which I think for many of us really are life itself, for much longer than we otherwise would be able to.
So it makes you more human, basically, right? Ultimately. Um, so when we talk about strength training, we're talking about, lifting things. How does the marriage of strength training and aerobic capacity work kind of come together? And in your studies, h- where did you see that confliction or that marriage or that relationship developing and over time?
Um, so epidemiology is a word that can make everybody's eyes glaze over, but stick with me here for a second. Epidemiology, as you may know, is the study of health behaviors in large populations and the outcomes of those behaviors. And epidemiologists never even looked at strength training until, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, the very first questions on these studies that considered um, the outcomes of weight training. What they have found out over time is that even though aerobic training increases longevity by a greater degree than weight training if they're considered in isolation from one another. In many cases, the combination of them kind of supercharges the effect of either one individually. Let me make this simpler. In terms of all-cause mortality, that is the risk of dying of any reason within a certain period of time, doing aerobic exercise reduces your risk by something in the realm of 20%. Doing resistance exercise reduces your risk by something in the realm of 15%. But doing both reduces your risk by more than 40%. Roughly the same thing is true for cardiovascular exercise. But when it comes to, and in terms of risk of death from cardiovascular disease complications, but when it comes to cancer, the risk reduction works in exactly the opposite direction. Aerobics alone don't make any difference to your risk of dying from cancer. Resistance exercise alone reduces your risk of dying from cancer by something like 20%. But if you put them together, they reduce your risk by around 35%.
Yeah. So do it.
So do it.
The bottom line is do it. Do both.
And this is not for, these risk reductions are not measured in terms of like the star pupils at Pharos. We're talking about people just doing the minimum recommendations, like from the federal or the WHO exercise guidelines. So that's 2 sessions of weight training per week. That's 150 minutes of medium to high intensity cardiovascular exercise. So the benefits are immense for a very small investment of time and effort.
So basically, most of you guys are basically immortal at this point because you guys are all coming 5 to 7 days a week. So you guys are going to live forever. I do want to open out to you guys. If you have any questions to Michael about the book, if you've read it, or just any questions in general about strength training or aerobic work, because Michael can answer those questions. So far away.
I haven't read the book yet. I'm interested in the shadow.
The shadow.
Talked about where do people's mindset about strength training and going to the gym go sideways. When did it go sideways? The vanity, the sort of, so what you guys were both talking about is a very internal,
Yes.
holistic approach. It's internal, how it helps me, what it makes me feel better. Whereas the gym culture from my childhood was the vanity, the life's wrong because you see me flexing as opposed to what I feel inside. This sort of external, shadowy, sorry, that's a general. Yeah, this external, I'm strong because you see how big my muscle is, as opposed to how I feel, how strong I feel from inside. And I wonder if you have experienced where that went sideways. The Gold's Gym of Arnold years, and I was old enough to was around to see that.
Yeah.
I stayed away because I didn't want to be one of those show-offs.
Yep. Let me answer in 1 second. May I ask, as people are taking off, if you feel like grabbing a card from the table there, I just love it. If you would follow me on Instagram, if you would be in touch, if you have any questions, or if you give 1 or 2 of these to friends of yours who you think might be interested. And I'm so grateful to everybody for coming. I mean, it's just been so great to be here this morning.
And happy to sign a book as well if you guys want an autographed book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To your question, Steve, I did a lot of work to try to figure that out. I don't think there's an empirically true answer, but I do think that the culture, when the culture of bodybuilding shifted so that mass was really the sole criterion for judging those contests, which turned that arms race into a kind of pharmaceutical arms race. I think it just changed people's. It did two things. It made, especially through the figure of Arnold, it made extremely muscular bodies more fascinating to more people. And so in that way, it actually really opened up the culture to a place like Pharos being able to happen. I mean, without Golds, we wouldn't be sitting here today, I really believe. But on the other hand, for many people, it was exclusionary, and it did. I mean, people have tracked the life expectancy of winners of the Mr. Olympia contest, and as the their body weights increased,
And
their
drugs
life,
got
yeah,
more.
and
Yeah.
the drugs got more, the life expectancy decreased. And I think a lot of people were just turned off by that and said, this has nothing to do with me.
But if we look at like Greek mythology and we look at the physiques of Greek statues and stuff like that, hasn't there always been an attraction to that physicality? Like, even in terms of like procreation, like we are naturally attracted to people that we want to procreate with, right? That's something to take note of. So I don't think you can completely separate like the physical side of it from the emotional like benefits of strength training, because it's always been there, right?
Absolutely not. You're 100% correct. But the thing we have to keep in mind when we look at those statues is that they saw those bodies in a different way than we did. Like, they actually thought that Hercules was strong, not because he had all of that, not because he had all of that muscle mass, but because he had highly articulated joints. They believed that it was the lines around the muscle
Mm,
that were the source of strength, not the muscles themselves. They thought
right.
that muscle, that which the contractile tissue that we now know does the work of movement, they thought was really just a factory for creating tendons,
Mm,
which, when activated by a portion of hot air that was trapped inside the body called pneuma, when that was sent out from the heart, the tendons would contract and pull on our bodies, on our bones, like marionettes. So muscle just didn't play the role in their understanding of how the body worked that it plays in our understanding.
so why are we so attracted to that? Like, why, it's been forever. Like, I want to look like a Greek god. Like, why is that in our consciousness? Where did that come from, do you think? Because objectively, I can look at it and think that's attractive. Like, but I don't know where that thought comes from. It just is. Like, I don't think that's been like programmed into me or has it? Has it been culturally programmed into me that physique is an appealing physique, or is it just a natural,
So the question of whether it's natural is probably,
impossible to answer?
that's deeper than I can go. But what I can say is that um, when Greek statues started to appear all over sanctuaries in the Greek lands around 500 BC, the first part of the body that was fascinating to every sculptor in every region of Greece, no matter what, was the knee. And the articulation of muscles around the knee only heightened the sort of drama of seeing this joint.
So they had like a knee fetish.
They had a knee fetish because they believed that the knees were the seat of power,
Oh, wow.
even of paternity.
Yeah.
Some of the earliest poems say that that semen actually came from the knees.
Oh, wow.
And Homer writes, like, when a Homeric warrior says uh, uh, that he's going to kill another warrior, he says, "I'm going to unstring your knees." So, um, so we've been looking at these muscles, not always seeing them as muscles, but seeing those same forms and um, coveting them.
Right.
For thousands of years.
Yeah.
Uh,
And to your point, Steve, was it just kind of like the extent to which it went that was unappealing to you? Is like, this is just too much? Or was it
I think it was a separation.
right?
I think that was them and me.
Right. It was too far away from the,
And they were the in club where they were the big ones. And I wasn't. So I'm not going to put myself in their realm. I'm
Right,
not going
right.
to go in that
yeah.
right.
because I'm afraid or I feel less than.
Yeah. And
Separate.
that's the tricky thing about inspiration, right? Because some things to us are inspiring, and then and CrossFit's a great example. So when CrossFit first started out, it was kind of like, even the people who are really good at it, it was still like achievable for like normal people. It's like, oh, this is, I could maybe do that. But then these guys at the top got so good and so far away from everyone else that it stopped being relatable at the top end. It's like, I can't, like, who can do that? That's ridiculous. So once they lost that connection with the common person and the common person in the gym, it kind of started to lose its appeal. Whereas when it's closer to us, when it's more relative, it appeals more. And I think that's true of bodybuilding, right? When it was like, when the size was less, when it was less extreme, it was closer to us. It was like, this is relatable. As soon as it gets into like a different realm, you're kind of like, okay, you've lost me.
Right.
You know, so I think maybe that's part of it. It's like, it has to be, we have to be able to relate to it in a kind of human way for it to appeal to the masses. Otherwise it just gets very niche.
Yeah.
And you're always going to get niche markets of like, people have like fetishes or whatever, like I'm super attracted to this or that. But broadly speaking, I think we need to keep fitness for the mass populations relatable. We have to make it like, and I think this has been a problem, you know, up until recent years, has been a problem of like the us and them type mentality. Like, this isn't for me, this is for them. But now hopefully we're turning that corner where the gym is becoming more of a open to the broader market.
When you ask why muscle is attractive, when you ask why that seems built deep in our nature, I also want to answer that it's because of what that sort of physique, a muscular physique, has often symbolized in the very simplest and most basic terms. And I think that is this: strength is our ability to act upon the world. And muscle is what modulates our ability to act upon the world. And that ability to act upon the world, to do what you want to in life, that is what is sexy.
Right. And maybe we're attracted to people that either can protect us or support us or do the things with us that we want to do. So maybe that physicality kind of like appeals to us in that sense. Like, oh, I want to live this kind of life and this person can support me in that journey. So I'm attracted to that. Maybe.
Yeah. There's a whole literature about this, evolutionary biologists who've looked at these questions. I looked at a lot of that literature and I just decided that was another book.
Yeah, that's a whole other book.
You know,
maybe it's just hot.
So,
any other questions, guys, from the floor?
I have a question for you, Peter.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I was just wondering. I didn't realize it for a little while when I first came to the gym, but you don't display mirrors in the main gym, which I really appreciate. Can you talk a little bit about your ethos around that?
Yeah.
Is that a very intentional decision and why?
Sure. So kind of almost to Steve's point. So what happened was mirrors became a thing in bodybuilding gyms because everyone wanted to check their physiques all the time. Okay. So it became a very shallow kind of like aesthetic thing. In the early 2000s, and you'll know this from your Jim Jones days, it was kind of the rejection of that culture. So it was saying, we're going to stop making this about appearance and we're going to make this about function. It's not the case of what you look like. It's a case of what you can do. So it was kind of a rejection of that very kind of shallow, very kind of like superficial culture, and an embracement of, I'm going to really focus on what I can achieve, what I can do, how I can perform, and how I can feel. So it was basically like just creating a space where you're not thinking about what you look like, you're focusing on what you can do. And then what you look like becomes because of what you can do, as opposed to that being like the end goal. So that was basically the philosophy behind it. And the kind of like the gyms where I got my education were kind of more in that vein. I mean, I grew up in bodybuilding gyms, but then my main kind of like education and fitness came from the ladder, which was like, we're going to focus on performance over aesthetics. Now I'm kind of like, I like a little bit of that as well. So I'll mix it up. But yeah, that's really why that happened the way that it did. And I think it can be a distraction. Yeah. If you're using it to check your form and make sure you're squatting properly, that's one thing. But if you're looking at mirrors to just constantly see what you look like all the time, then it's a distraction from the actual workout. Especially when you've got like a group environment where it's like high octane, everybody's moving, everybody's doing stuff. If in that room, in a class, everybody was just looking at themselves all the time, a class would take 3 hours. So, it becomes a distraction at that point. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Any other questions, guys? All right, you guys. Well, thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming in. Thank you to Michael for coming in. Grab a book, get it signed, and hopefully you guys will be back soon. Any questions for Michael? He's here.